What sort of an impact do you expect that to have?
The government's numbers suggest, Pete, that this will add 30,000 new homes over that sort of 6-month period, which I suppose the proof will be in the pudding. And obviously there's a focus on not just the new homes, but obviously decent renovations or rebuilds, really. We've seen some, the council approvals are down by 60,000, and there's obviously some household economic forecasts which suggest a major gap, looming gap coming up and shortfall in new homes. So I suppose the question really will be around additionality. How much more additional housing demand will this generate? And I suppose, again, the proof will be in the pudding.
See, I look at that 150 grand worth of renovations. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is. And I suspect, Pete, probably one of the factors that Minister Sukkar in particular has had in mind here is trying to avoid headlines around rorts and dodgy dunny jobs and that type of thing. I would think that sets a fairly high bar. Now, whether or not that's such a high bar that someone who's earning up to 125,000 or up to 200,000 for a couple to actually commence a rebuild, I suppose that will be the tricky part of this. But we know that there definitely will be a benefit when it comes to new homes. The question will be, will it be enough to sort of meet that shortfall that we know is looming?
And it's probably more the big sell here is the jobs, right? I mean, the Treasurer is on this morning saying that it's going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. I mean, is that ambitious?
Look, I think the bottom line is without this scheme, we knew that there's going to continue to be some housing demand and there's going to be some new builds. So whether or not this would have happened in lieu of this particular scheme, I suppose we just won't know because the government's proceeding with it. It's a $700 million spend. We know that kind of spend will generate a multiplier effect throughout the housing sector. So the bottom line is there'll be good news, and importantly for the housing sector and for construction jobs, there's some certainty that the government's got some cash in the sector, and that's a really useful thing. I suppose it's a bit disappointing, though, that we don't have a social housing component of that, because we do know that without that particular government support and demand, those houses don't get built. So if you want a way to guarantee new demand in the housing sector, an investment through social housing will guarantee that, because we know that without it, it doesn't happen.
Well, the PM pivoted that argument towards the states this morning when he was pressed about that in that press conference. He said that, you know, the federal government can't do everything. It's up to the states to be able to contribute a little bit more when it comes to social housing.
Yeah, and look, that absolutely is right. Historically, it's the states and territories responsible for administering public housing, but there are partnership agreements which do have Commonwealth involvement. There's a National Housing Finance Investment Corporation which also has a responsibility in providing and supporting some of that investment by state government. So, look, it's one of those things where it'd be nice to see a new agreement, to be frank, pretty quickly, to be able to roll some more Commonwealth and taxpayer money out the door and build it, because we know we've got zero interest rates. It's now is actually a really good time for governments to be borrowing and investing in this space.
We are now in a recession, James. I mean, I feel like a lot of Australians probably thought we already were in a recession. Did it come as much of a surprise to you?
No, not at all. Like, I think some economists were sort of dicing around whether or not we'd have flat or maybe slightly positive growth in the March quarter. I think the way that the quarter went, and let's remember, it wasn't too long ago we were talking about the bushfire recovery before COVID, of course. So it was always going to be a bad quarter. The household consumption numbers in particular drove that negative number, Pete. We know that we're in the middle of obviously an even worse quarter. The government's rolling out some schemes with JobKeeper and JobSeeker to try and underpin private sector investment at the moment. We know that we're obviously looking at two negative quarters. I think it was a good move for the Treasurer to basically own up to it rather than trying to sort of fight off for the next few months whether or not we're in a technical recession. It's a recession and it feels like a recession.
Well, he's taken the hard questions from journalists over that. I guess he'll be remembered for it, amongst some other things. That it was on his watch is basically what I was trying to say. But you've got to give him some credit, though, right? Because the coronavirus, as Tom Petrovsky said to me on the show a little bit earlier, it came at the planet like a meteor. There was no warning, and they've tried to do what they can to get around that.
Yeah, exactly right. I think I think from an economic and society perspective, the government's done the right thing. It's put, by and large, and we could quibble around the margins, but it's put some really good measures in place initially to deal with the health crisis and now to sort of try and flatten out support and economic recovery. So hats off to that. Yeah, look, of course, on an individual basis, I'm sure Mr Frydenberg won't want to have this on his resume, but we do know that there's some extenuating circumstances. What's really important now is making sure we get as many Australians back into jobs and as many businesses going again as quickly as we can.